It's our first lecture of the fall semester, so this is always an exciting time because you go through the spring, the summer, and now we can enrich you with some artists and their knowledge. And many of you know our visiting artist today because she's not really visiting. She's here to stay. Professor Marilee Salvator, who many of you probably have had in class or seen in the hallways of Make Science. So we're very pleased to be sharing her knowledge and her story of her work, as well as her work in the gallery, her prints and installations, which are gorgeous. And so it was very exciting to work with you. She did most of the work as far as installing and everything, and kind of was there just to help out a little bit, but nonetheless it was exciting because I haven't really worked with you and seen a lot of your work before, so it's been a privilege. If I can ask everybody to turn your cell phones off. That way, any interruptions. Thank you. Marilee Salvator received her BFA from Illinois State University in Normal, Illinois in 2000, and her MFA degree from University of Mexico, Albuquerque, New Mexico in 2004. She has taught printmaking and design at the University of Mexico in Albuquerque, University of Manitoba in Winnipeg, and is currently an assistant professor at Bloomsburg University, where you are right now. In the last 5 years, Marilee Salvator's work has been exhibited in over 40 solo and group exhibitions throughout North America, South Korea, China, Poland, Italy, and Romania. And I can attest to that because probably every week I have a postcard saying Marilee's having a new show in my mailbox, so, which is really cool. So without further ado, Marilee Salvator.
Hello, thank you very much. I really appreciate seeing you all here. I do want to say to Lee, who has disappeared, he actually did a lot of work on the exhibition. He's sort of lying about that. What? Oh, you can't hear me. Okay. I'll speak up. Can you hear me now? Okay. So I do want to thank you very much, Lee, for all of your really hard work. There were some technical difficulties, and he was a lifesaver in helping me deal with those along the way. I also want to say thank you to my colleagues in the department, who are very inspirational. Okay, so my work. I'm going to show you a bunch of images today. I'm going to show you images of other artists, my work, as well as things that I find inspirational outside of the art world. My work is very process-orientated. I tend to set up situations that are very labor-intensive. I often draw inspiration from feminist ideals and the natural world that surrounds me. This first image here is a work by Shona MacDonald, who was a professor at Illinois State University when I went to school there. I was very fascinated with Shona's work because she too was very interested in this very labor-intensive, ritualistic kind of activities. For example, this particular piece you're seeing here is a large collage. What Shona was doing at this point in time was collecting security envelopes. You know, those envelopes that you get your bills and stuff in that have the nice little patterns on the inside. That we normally throw in the garbage can. Or maybe if we're really considerate, we might actually put in the recycle bin. Shona was collecting these in her studio, and she'd have these giant stacks all over the place, and she'd sort them through color and pattern. Then she'd cut them into tiny little strips and create these very large works by gluing them down one by one. So this piece is probably twice as large as what you're seeing it on the screen. Here's another one. One of the things that I was fascinated, other than in addition to her dedication to her craft, was the fact that she was looking at these things and finding the beauty in them when we normally don't pay any attention to them at all. So our world is surrounded by beauty, and we often don't even pay attention. So that was something that I was very inspired by, and it was really probably the first time I ever thought about that. Okay, this work here is by Tom Friedman, who's a very interesting artist, in my opinion. He also employs very labor-intensive activities, what he calls the interplay of relations caused by the coming and going of things. This large untitled work, which is 72 inches in diameter, is made up of small, simple loops of masking tape. Here's a detail. Next artist is Yayoi Kusama, who is very inspirational to me. She's a Japanese artist, and she's actually 80 now, and she still creates art every day. She's fascinated and actually obsessed with circles and dots. Her mark making is very obsessive. From the time she was 10 years old, she's been doing these dots. And she'll do those dots all over the place, all over the walls, all over the ceiling, all over the floor, all over people if they get in the space. Very obsessive compulsive. She calls them to infinity nets. Here's a picture of her working in her studio. Her studio happens to be in a mental hospital as well. This is an artist named Julie Meritu. She discusses her work as being composed of multifaceted layers of place, space, and time that impact the formulation of personal and communal identity. I'm very drawn to her use of layering and, again, this sort of obsessive mark making. Here's a piece that I made in 2000. At this time, I saw sand painters for the first time. These are Buddhist monks, and they create these large mandalas out of sand. So they sit there for at least a week, if not maybe a month, and build these very complex images grain by grain. The part that I find the most fascinating about this is after they've spent all this time and put all this labor into the work, they sweep it up, and that's the end. The act of doing this represents everything as being impermanent, so there's no need for us to sort of obsess and worry about something when it's not really very important, and it doesn't, in the Buddhist perspective, actually exist. So I started working in a way similar to this, or at least as best as I could, as being a person who still believed that I exist, the world exists around me, and having a hard time letting that go. I started creating these large canvases. This is probably close to the size you see here on the screen. And what I would do would be sit and draw for hours, drawing tiny little marks again. And then after I had spent several hours, I would take a sander and sand them away. And then I would sort of feel how that felt to me inside, which was kind of hard at first, letting go of that time. And then I would do it again, back and forth, over and over. What you have left is a record of that. So that's where I was different than the monks. I couldn't just burn it or something. This is a print by John Cage. A lot of people might know John Cage as a music composer, but he also actually made a lot of artwork, specifically a lot of prints. He made them at this place called Crown Point Press, which is in San Francisco. What I'm interested in about John Cage is his working process. Cage believed in putting the emphasis on the action of the process. He would use what he called chance operations to decide how to organize his compositions. So he had this collection of 15 rocks that he had collected from around the world. And he would use these rocks and create these compositions based on chance. He was a big believer in the I Ching, if anyone's familiar with that. So what he would do was maybe like roll dice or something to figure out where the rock should go, and then he'd set them on his plate, and then he would trace them. So that's where you see the circles. He did this to leave out his own personality. In 2000, I moved to New Mexico. And this was a drastic change for me because I grew up in the Midwest, climate-wise. Midwest, it rained all the time, and New Mexico is a desert. I was there for a few months before I ever saw a raindrop. The first time I saw a raindrop, I didn't think too much of it, but then I happened to go outside and I noticed every single person in my neighborhood was on their porch or outside going like this. And I was like, what's going on? And then it occurred to me, oh yeah, it hasn't rained in 2 months. So I suddenly was aware of how sacred the rain had become in my environment. And I was very fascinated by that. So I decided I wanted to make my work about that. So what I did was each time it would rain, I'd go outside with a piece of paper, like let's say this is my paper, and I would put it out and let the rain hit the paper, and then I would trace those little drops. This took a long time. I probably spent 6 months doing this. I started recruiting people because the rain was so rare. So it would be like, okay, I think it's gonna rain, so I'd get a big bunch of people and we'd all go out and trace the drops. So we're collecting these records of the raindrops. After I had enough data, I started working on the project. And what I ended up making was this here, this large installation. It's about 9 feet tall, and the right side is about 12 feet. Left side is probably about 9 feet as well. And each little square there is 6 inches, and it includes 3 pieces of paper that are printed on and then hand sewn together and dipped in wax. So you can see through and see the layers. There's something I wrote about this piece that I think it's best if I just read it to you. This work is related to touch. How delicately can I create a matrix that will hold enough ink to leave evidence of its existence on the paper? Or how transparent does the paper need to be to see all the layers of information? How softly can one be touched and still be felt? Or how hard does one need to be hit to be marked? Often when it begins to rain, you are not for sure if it was a raindrop you felt or something else. You stop and pay more attention. Maybe hold out your hand as an invitation for the rain to touch your skin again. I want to make images that are about delicate moments, moments involving the senses instead of logic, and images that are about the fragility, beauty, and delicacy found in human life. Here's a detail. When this was exhibited, I had gloves so you can go and look at the individual pieces and see how they're layered. So you had a personal experience with each little block, but then you also have this large sort of engulfing experience of the whole piece. I left the little strings hanging from my thread to sort of add to that sense of fragility. I made a whole series after that that were a little bit larger. These are about 20 inches by 20 inches with multiple layers of paper. And they're all lithography. This one's not this yellow. This projector's a little weird. After I finished that body of work, I was sort of a little bummed out and didn't know what I should do next, and I was wandering around between my studio and my house, and I was living in Albuquerque, which is a pretty urban area, pretty dirty, and I'd wander through these alleys between my house and the studio, and one day I happened upon to look at this dumpster, and I was like, wow, look at the beauty in that. So this is the side, and that's like where the truck kept hitting it. Here was another one. I began to think about this line between beauty and repulsion. Again, as I had said earlier, how we often don't see the beauty that's really surrounding us, especially in places that are unexpected, like garbage dumpsters. Of course, I went home, and then there are my little puppies. This is actually Biggie, is the blonde dog, and the black one's Pudge. So I was thinking about how can my dogs be used as my artwork too. So I started thinking about dog poop. So I was using this very sacred substance of the rain, and then you have this profane substance of poop. And I thought it would be interesting to sort of use those as a comparison to each other. Yes, I'm serious. So my next body of work was about that. I didn't want to touch the dog poop because I really wasn't interested in the disgusting aspect of it. So I created this device where I could trace it and not actually have to touch it. I used a can, and I cut the can in half, so it was about that tall. And I got a clear clipboard and some pieces of acetate that were clear. And so what I would do is, here's the poop, and I would put my cans on both sides and the clipboard there, insert my acetate, and draw little line drawings above it. So I gathered this data, just like I did for the rain, but with poop. And then I made a series of paintings based on that. These are all in caustic. And I chose caustic because I was also able to do this layering that I'm so fond of doing in my work. And within the paintings, there's the prints that are layered. So we have painting and prints together. So the images would be projected of the poop onto the paintings. These were always entertaining to me because people, depending on their personalities, they would come up with different things. One person would enter my studio and kept telling me she felt like she was surrounded by penises. And another person felt like she wanted to hug the little men. So I got a kick out of that. Okay. This is a piece that I made directly on a wall for a solo show that I had in Winnipeg, Manitoba. I wanted to make a work that would grow and take over a whole entire space, reproduce and transform within that space. So what I did was I created a whole bunch of silk screens of these tiny little obsessive circles, and I just started printing them directly onto the wall, and it kind of wrapped around to another wall. Here's a detail. As I was working, while I was waiting for my circles to dry that I printed, I would draw them by hand. So they gave me a week to work on this, so pretty much for a week straight, other than maybe 7 or 8 hours of sleeping, I sat there and would print, draw, back and forth until I came up with this large image. One thing that I became really interested in was the relationship between these little circles that I was drawing and women's handicrafts. They became almost like a two-dimensional knitting or like a lace making. I loved how they would interlock within themselves and create these complex patterns. Plants. I love plants. I have lots of them. This is a picture of an apartment I lived in before I moved here. It had this really nice big window that was full of plants. Vines especially. And again, their ability to sort of grow and take over the space. If you give them the room, they'll just sort of invade it and they keep expanding. And I found that really fascinating. And these specific plants that I have, there's a couple of vines, and I still actually have cuttings, and I've had them for years, and you plant them, and then within a few weeks, they're just going crazy, taking over. Last summer, I had the opportunity to travel to China with 15 international artists, printmakers, and we were doing all kinds of things when we were there, but one of the things was travel. And my favorite part of the country was southeastern China, this very rural area that we went to. And there were several reasons why, but here's a picture that I took there. These rice fields. I was just blown away by how they use the land. every single inch was farmed. Up to the road, like right there, they'd have cabbage growing. Every single inch. And